go in and I'm not okay. Well, thank you, ma'am.
Well, the facade is working.
What are you doing about his book?
What do you mean, what am I doing?
You said about getting yours.
Would you reserve one?
Absolutely.
Oh, let's see what we can do.
Do you know how much you want?
I have one spokesman, so if I get him, I have mine in my chair. This is for the audience.
The ones here, were they for, is there mics up there now?
$12 if I have an extra one. $12 for a used copy.
Do you have all those for me?
I don't know yet.
Because I sent
You sent
you
me one? Sure.
100 years ago.
100 years ago? Oh.
Have you been there before?
So I'm assuming the yellow. Yeah. Did you put a good camera in the budget? When we get.
Yeah.
The only thing is for me to check the sound.
Just crazy.
You want to hear it.
When someone streaming YouTube is that close to the window in the room. Nobody should be streaming YouTube when you're in the room. I had a woman working for my daughters decided they wanted to be so they get
Check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
All the
okay.
inside and all the orthodox from outside freezing their butts off. And it was snowing on top of it. I mean, it was. But she looked
Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
that's where we are. Like the water? Right over there.
Hello.
Check 1, 2.
You saw it on your phone.
I know, but I saw it.
No, it's just the volume. Volume is volume.
Hi. Yeah, it's nice to meet you. My favorite gym. Just so we get started, so you can't monitor, right? Like if you put like your book, you can't hear what you're doing. Good.
Well, what they hear on the outside world, you can't.
So we no, all right. So you can't like just text us out. They can hear.
That's not my fault. I realize it. Like I should be somewhere to my remember as well.
Yeah, that's all I get.
I mean, it is good.
Yeah,
If you want to allow it here,
Is there a way to open up the aperture?
no, because it's so bright, it's watching everything out. If I open it up, it'll go away and won't see it.
All right.
When it gets the regular slides, it'll readjust.
Just for a little bit, then next to just for the beginning of the day.
Like I do annual meetings.
Yeah, because when they ask questions, we don't. I have two of them.
Red shirt boys are here. I'm going to everything's good.
Oh, Steve.
Just have to do
I told you.
Go on our trip?
Still, I wasn't.
And I can hold. And I can hold the car. I might. You can use it, my own. That's
I started, and I did it. I actually made it without paying. So I was like, you're right. It's been 7 months. I missed both seasons. So just to get back on the court is like amazing. I'm very grateful.
Okay, what do we have here? I have to think about it, right?
I play golf. I didn't play golf. Back to my Saturday. Yes, I Carol? Yeah, I know.
My favorite former comedians. I can't say that anymore because I got married. We were having a lot of trouble with immigration, so it's good. At our age, we just went down to see the Justice Society. It's kind I know. I was in Lisbon, and two couples from
How are you? Got focused on
Maybe.
Getting there.
I'm debating. Yeah, me neither.
I love that. You can tell it's this is my daughter's puppy. She was watching her great dog. And she found that yes, they were just a map out there. I know. Yes. And what they have got
Shelves and I have a street take out the library too. And I have a collection of books on alcoholics.
It's a fast read.
And then when I'm done, we usually leave them out for about 2 years. So we have a whole research collection. And I've been blessed to have hundreds of books like you.
They were just there. Mother
Very
wants
proud.
to free. Yeah. Get some down over here. Well, she was that week old and had crickets and everything. And her father was and my mother was September 4th. And it's just another 4 days. Our son married. I know. That's what I'm getting.
Three trips, our trip to Europe, summer, so
You learn one thing. How we stop the trains that are I don't want to go over there. I know.
Yeah, you always tell us. You always I'm Ellen.
Go get to work. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for your help.
Good to see you. I'm still here. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Recognize most of you. Professor Tammy's going to get this show rolling in just a second. This will be a little different. Today we have stories of love, sex, and scandal. I don't know that there are any in American political history. All the presidents behaved. That's why I wrote the book. Yeah, and holler at me at some point. The fun stories, I think, are the stories of how you find this and all the letters I went through and digging up this. And several of the presidents wrote and admitted it. So I'll say before we get the camera fully rolling. For example, I went to the Kennedy Library, and when John Kennedy was about 21, he went to Mexico, and he wrote all about it. So it's not a theory. He wrote, excuse me, I'm always verbatim. Kennedy wrote, I went for a suck and a fuck, and I came back with a venereal disease. So it's not a theory or someone. He wrote it. He wrote it. So JFK, when he was a young man. So anyway, so a lot of them actually wrote this stuff down, but we'll talk about all that. Now that I have your attention.
Okay. What do you think about our setup today, everybody? You like that?
Tammy rocks.
Yes. This is because this is more, we're not doing a lecture. We're doing a book club, and our Friday morning book clubs, if you all want to know, we do have food every time. And the event is complimentary, and we are going to start up again next season, this November. So again, yes, you get the world treatment, and we have Jane Rubin is continuing to be our facilitator, and I'll email out all the books so we can get started reading on next season's books. So I appreciate everybody coming here, and this is a great turnout, and we have 39 people that are streaming live on our YouTube channel, and the chat is open, and I will monitor the questions on the app, and we'll keep them all related to the book. Okay, everybody? And so we're gonna get started. He'll start talking. I'll ask a few questions. We have microphones back there. Jamie, our IT, if you have a question regarding the book throughout, we'll open up the microphone. And everybody, okay, she's got a seat. Shh. Yes, oh my gosh. Please, turn your cell phones on vibrate. Okay. I could use an updated phone, so if anybody's ringing, I will gladly swap you out for an iPhone 14 and above. Okay. You want to make sure it works. It's turned on. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Watson.
Thanks, Tammy. You rock. So I'm not saying this, I really mean that Tammy's the best. Yeah, you guys are the best. I do this 4 or 5 days a week for the last 36 years as a professor. So all around the country, universities, museums, battlefields in Europe and Latin America. But I love Tammy. I love working with her. So you're really blessed. And I mean that.
There's some seats over here on the other side.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries. So, so I guess a good starting point is I write books on history. My favorite thing to focus on is the history you don't know. The late great Librarian of Congress, Daniel Boorstin, if that name rings a bell, fantastic historian, used to always say that 99% of all the books ever written are gone. They decompose, right? Think about it. If you get paper today and you put it out on your golf course, you come back in 3 months, it's soil. And yet paper today is chemically treated, processed, right? Imagine parchment made from a sheep's stomach 300 years ago or 2,000 years ago. It had no shelf life. So if 99%, Boorstin said 99% of the books have decomposed, been burned, destroyed on purpose, that means we're working with about 1% of the written record. So there's more we don't know than we do know about history, including some whoppers. Every year we learn a crazy new story about the Holocaust, if not every dang day, right? Who would think that there's still stories out there? So that's what I like to do. So I wrote 49 books. Book number 49 came out last week. It's called Rebels at the Gates. It's about the end of the Civil War. The Confederacy tried to sack Washington, D.C. Darn near pulled it off. Anyway, so this book, I had written a book on life in the White House. I wrote a book about the First Ladies. So I was sitting around thinking, you know, I like to write books in threes. So I was thinking, what else could I do about just life in the White House and marriages? And I was thinking about a book on George and Martha Washington's marriage, because Martha's presented to us as some, you know, bubby in the kitchen, right? With her bonnet. Didn't she look like a hybrid between Betty Crocker and Mrs. Santa Claus? But Martha was a serious badass. Martha was incredible. She left behind 157 letters. She was a prolific letter writer, but she burned most of them. One of her letters, she was asked to describe herself. She said, quote unquote, "I'm an old-fashioned Virginia housekeeper, busy as a bee, steady as a clock, cheerful as a cricket." That's cute. But behind the scenes, Martha was brave, courageous. She had a civic duty, a remarkable woman who lost almost everybody she loved in her life. First husband, friends, all of her children, 2 of them young. So she was really tough. So I thought a book on George and Martha's marriage. And I was reading that during the Revolutionary War, which lasted from April of 1775 to September of 1783, that's a long war. Martha visited George every winter of the war, which doesn't sound impressive, but that's hundreds of miles, open carriage, through enemy territory, dead of winter, and she's not a spring chicken, and no GPS, right? So, and I'm reading about this, and I'm like, wow, this is gonna be a good book. I never wrote the book, because I read a letter from Hamilton. And historians, we love to read and quote Ulysses Grant, Harry Truman, and Alexander Hamilton, those three. Those 3 men were incapable of lying. They even got themselves in trouble. Hamilton got himself killed because they were so honest. So if Hamilton wrote it, you can cash that check at the bank. So Hamilton writes, quote unquote, thank goodness, all the quotes are verbatim. I always try to memorize quotes. Thank goodness Lady Washington has arrived in camp. The good general has been inconsolable. Now we can finally get back to the business of winning the war. George was mopey, volcanic temper, just, you know, a firecracker ready to go off on everybody. Martha arrives, he's a Zen master. And I'm thinking, they had sex. And I'm thinking, can I write that? And then I'm thinking, no one else has. It's history. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I started thinking, what if I write a book about affairs and love and sex and scandal? And so that letter from Hamilton is what prompted this particular book. So, okay.
That was actually the first question. It said, inspiration for the book. So, next, let's make sure your clicker works. And so I asked Dr. Watson earlier, a couple of people who did read the book, they thought it was read like a textbook. And
It's a serious history book, just so happens to be about sex.
so I wanted him to clarify for everybody who his audience is when he writes these books.
All my books have a couple of audiences. One, university libraries all buy the book. Two, college classrooms use the books. But three, a general trade, a general audience of people that like history. I'm not, and this is not meant to sound arrogant in any way, shape, or form. I'm a professor. I have no ego. I mean, nobody treats professors well, right? I'm always shocked that anybody shows up at any lecture. But I'm not going to write a book unless I try to write the definitive account every time I do it, right? If you go to the game, don't you play to win? Darn right you do. You seek excellence. So my new book I wrote on the Confederacy's attempt at sacking Washington, D.C., my goal was to make it the definitive work. So this is about presidential affairs and sex and love. And it's not something people write about. So I didn't just say George Washington slept with the following people. I told you about Washington, about the mistress, whether it happened or not, how we had it. Was it just a one-night stand? Was it true love? Was it? So I tried to write the definitive book. So it's full of sex and affairs and scandals, but it's also full of a lot of context, information, and background. Otherwise, my view is why write it? I'm nerdy about my history, and I always strive for excellence in everything I do. So whenever I write, I try to write the definitive. And that, again, I don't think that's arrogant. I think everybody should have that as a goal. So, yeah.
I have a question. Your book uncovers intimate details about presidents from 1789 to 1900. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced while researching these personal stories, especially given the historical distance and limited records from that era?
Great. So, of course, one of the problems being an historian, it's like being a detective, only everybody in your crime scene died 200 years ago, right? So good luck with that. The problem with this is not a lot of presidents would write down, hey, I had an affair and I cheated and I lied. Today we don't even care if we lie, right? I mean, today it's just nobody cares. But once upon a time, people didn't want folks to discover this kind of stuff. So I couldn't just read Thomas Jefferson's diary where he admitted to having an affair with a slave named Sally Hemings, right? I couldn't just read that. But there was a muckraking reporter from Scotland called James T. Callender, with A's instead of an A, Callender. And Jefferson put Callender on the payroll. Callender's job was to dig up dirt on Jefferson's enemy, Hamilton, and others. And Jefferson, those of you that know me know I've never liked Thomas Jefferson. I loathe Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was whiny, standoffish, criticized the military but wouldn't serve, always wrote crap about everybody and then was thin-skinned and blamed everyone. Jefferson has had the best publicist in history, I swear to God. But anyway, so Jefferson actually, he bought a newspaper, the Richmond Reporter, solely to write dirt on Washington, Adams, Hamilton, John Jay, and people he didn't necessarily like. So James T. Callender is working for Jefferson. Callender gets arrested. Okay? He's jailed. So he writes to Jefferson saying, I need money. I need you to get me out of jail, and I'm coming to stay with you. I lost my house. And Jefferson says, you're toxic now. I don't know you. Goodbye. So what Callender does is he approaches Hamilton. I know all Jefferson's dirt, including the yellow toms. That's light-skinned slaves at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. So that Jefferson had a lot of affairs, and there were yellow toms, which is a racist, degrading term. But Callender wrote all this dirt down. So there are ways of finding it, and fortunately his letters survive. Hamilton, to his credit, did not employ Callender and delve into the mud. Hamilton said, I don't do that. But Callender wrote so many letters begging him to bail him out, and we have all Callender's dirt. So that was the starting place. Then I go and read the next one, and I have corroborating sources. To make this even more interesting, shortly after this incident, Callender was found dead, face first, in a little creek Cause of death, never resolved. Some people said he drank too much and fell into a creek a couple inches deep. Could he have been offed? It's hard to say. Callender had everybody's dirt and was trafficking in dirt. But so there, I found that. Abraham Lincoln, yeah, I know, right? Say it isn't so. Yeah, even Abe, not when he was married, as a young man, Lincoln at least twice visited prostitutes. And we know this how? Because in one letter, Lincoln admitted it. In another letter, his best friend, Joshua Speed, he was his roommate and best buddy, and the prostitute wrote about it. So Lincoln writes one letter to a physician in Chicago, freaked out. Oh my gosh, I think I have a venereal disease. What do I do? Am I going to die? And his physician writes back and goes, I've never even seen you. You think I'm seeing you, and then we'll figure this out. So it shows what a panic Lincoln as a young man was in. We don't know one way or the other. The other letter was Lincoln, he's traveling, he's young, he's unmarried, he's dirt poor. He arrives at Joshua Speed's general store. Yep, and gets him a prostitute. And Lincoln walks in and he this is a general store that sold a saddle, socks, flour, coffee, everything. Lincoln gets everything, goes up to the counter and says, quote unquote, Speed, there's something I failed to neglected to tell you. I don't have any money. I'm going to need all this on credit. And Speed wrote that it was the saddest, most honest face he'd ever seen. So he said, yeah. And then Lincoln's walking out carrying everything, and Speed said, they always called each other by their last name. Speed says, Lincoln, have you even got a place to stay? Lincoln said, no. Speed said, I got one room above the shop. You can stay with me until you get your feet on the ground, and you can work here and work it off. And Lincoln worked off the debt and then some, and they became besties. So shortly thereafter, it's cute, when Speed told Lincoln he could stay here, Lincoln walks up the steps, comes down 30 seconds later empty-handed and says, quote unquote, well, Speed, I'm all moved in. Shortly thereafter, Speed's sleeping with a prostitute. And Lincoln's downstairs with a pillow over his head trying to hide. When the prostitute leaves, Lincoln goes up and Speed writes this. Lincoln says to Speed, he says, Speed, I've got to have a woman. It's been forever. And Speed says, you can have her. She's a professional. So only Lincoln would do this. This is adorable. This is my cute prostitute story. He didn't think there was such a thing.
Do you guys remember the answer for this?
Remember this?
I know we spoke about this.
Remember this? Lincoln says he asked for a letter of introduction. Armed with a letter of introduction, he goes to see the prostitute, who, if I remember correctly, charged him $5. Now, that's not Elliot Spitzer money. That's not 150 like Stormy Daniels got paid, 150 grand. But $5, Lincoln said, I don't have the money. And she said, but I believe you. He said, I will work this off and eventually pay it back. Finally, she says to him, there was just something about Lincoln that was so extraordinary. I always say you can't really understand Lincoln unless if you met him. Don't you every once in a while meet someone who's so interesting or so charismatic or so, all Lincoln had to do was open up his mouth and everybody fell in love with him. He was so funny, so warm, so witty, like Ben Franklin. So she says to Lincoln, this one's on the house. And she said he was sweating, he got up and ran away. So we know that he thought about it, but then he ran away. And I imagine Speed must have teased him mercilessly, but we don't know. If they did write it down, it doesn't survive. So anyways, so that's how you find these stories. I'll give you one more. What I did is, I think, with all due respect to my chosen profession, I think a lot of professors are condescending, a little snotty. They're a little full of themselves, right? So if you go to the presidential libraries, if you go to the National Archives, if you go to the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, this is where once a month for the last 35 years, I go visit these places. And I love to do this. To me, it's not work. I'm like a kid in a candy store when I'm down in the basement. But I always bring dark chocolate McNuts to the staff. And I bring donuts in every morning. And I'm nice to them, right? And then I say to them, look, I think I'm going to write about this. Jefferson had this thing with Sally Hemings, but I think he had an affair in Europe with a very young, very attractive Italian artist named Maria something. So then they do the work for me. Then they call and they're like, guess what we found? And I'm like, you got the papers? I'm like, I'm on my way. And then I bring more dark chocolate McNuts, right? You treat people with dignity. And these archivists, they're the best in the biz. And this is what they like to do. Probably 25, at least 25 years ago, I did a program for Mount Vernon, George Washington's, at their library, that we tried to figure out who George courted or dated when he was a young man. And the staff was so excited. They're like, we never thought of that. I'm like, bingo, right? And I said, I'll lead the effort. So we just poured through letters, and as best as we could tell, it appears that he tried to court 10 women. And he went 0 for 10. George Washington was not yet way over 6 foot tall, size 13 shoes, broad shouldered. Remember, men were a lot smaller back then. 6'2", 6'3" in the 1700s is like 6'9" today. Plus, Washington was ridiculously powerful. He was a very strong man, to the point where Hamilton loved this. Whenever Jefferson would do his usual, Hamilton would say, let's go see Washington, because Washington loved Hamilton. And Hamilton got a kick out of it because Jefferson was scared to death physically of Washington. His voice would break. He couldn't look at him in the eye because he was so powerful and so charismatic. Anyways, so the problem for George was George Washington tried to court older, prominent women. So he was looking for those Boca Cougars, basically. So could you imagine him at Glen Eagles?
He wouldn't have a chance.
Lights out. He would get all kinds of yummies made for him. And anyway,
Did these women, these whores perhaps, enter into the White House?
well, Washington, it appears he was loyal to Martha. I'm willing to put money on that. They had a good marriage. It wasn't a, hot and steamy one. It was like a firm partnership. He did not visit prostitutes. There's one story of washerwoman Kate, but it's made up by his critics. But Washington did try to court these 10 women, but they were all, Washington's a teenager with bad acne, a half-dead mule, no future, no education, and he's knocking on the doors of mansions in Tidewater, Virginia aristocracy. He went home and he wrote, the butler got the father, the lord of the state, who comes up and says, quote unquote, my daughter is a star out of thy orbit. And he slammed the door in Washington's face. Washington goes home and wrote, woe is me. He wrote this down. I'm unlucky at love. And then he writes, the roses are red, violets are blue poem. And it ends with the line, my poor wounded heart, 'tis been shot through by Cupid's dart. So George went 0 for 10 because he was courting way above his station. But then a few years later, he's the man, right? And Washington was also very aware of his own size, charisma, and power. He would dress the part. He literally would practice, how am I going to stand to look regal? Washington wrote down repeatedly how he bowed. He met his muse. The love of his life was Sally Carey Fairfax County, Lord Fairfax, an older, wealthy socialite, the preeminent salonista of Virginia society. And Sally's older, she's infatuated with George. She hires George to tend her garden, which is a magnificent metaphor, isn't it? So Lord Fairfax is little and round, and he's always traveling, and George is out there without a shirt on, looking like The Rock meets George Clooney, right? Sally's like looking out the window going, oh my God. So she invites George to sit next to her at her salons, where he meets the leading society members. That's where she taught him to dance. And she said to George, you can't just bow because you're going to be a great man. She taught him how to bow. He wrote it down several times. He would take his tricon hat off, put it under his left arm, rock back, and bring his right arm in front of him. So when George met you, he would go. And this big guy all dressed so he played the role. He was very aware of his stature and his charisma. One quick one, Ben Franklin, one of Ben Franklin's hobbies was watching women melt when they met Washington. And he and his daughter, and he and friends would always, Franklin would write, I couldn't go to the party, how many women wanted to dance with him and what did they do? they'd write back saying that they were all ready to faint when Washington would go up and bow, and there was a chance to dance with General Washington. I don't believe he had affairs with any of them, but I believe he enjoyed watching them sweat and melt like a girl on the way to the prom. And again, he would dance, and he made you feel like you were the center of the universe. So anyway, so there's a way to find these letters. It just took 10 years, and it took a lot of dark chocolate McNuts. And it took probably 50 archivists at historic sites around the country helping me over a decade. But we got it. Yeah.
I was just gonna lead into your next slide there.
Oh, go ahead.
I asked about who made it into the White House.
Oh, of course, yeah, okay. Sorry.
I had a sneak peek into his PowerPoint.
That's Andy Jackson, Andrew Jackson. Not looking like he does on the $20 bill. Andrew Jackson was one of the worst Americans ever to live. He was a compulsive liar. He was a bully. He was a rapist. He was a murderer. He was a horrific person. He should not be on the $20 bill. So Andrew Jackson was our 7th president, 1829 to 1837. And this is his wife, Rachel Donaldson. She was very scandalous. Her father, Colonel John Donaldson, was the first white man to really settle what is today Tennessee and Kentucky, right? He hacked it out of the woods, fought Indians, yada, yada, yada. And Rachel was a teenager, so she was the debutante of that frontier area, the daughter of the preeminent man that settled, right? So she does what a proper society girl ought not to do. She ran away and married a much older man named Louis Robards. And Robards was definitely emotionally abusive to her to let her survive. My guess would be physically as well. There's things we don't know. And when I say that I'm stepping on a limb, I always say it appears, maybe, perhaps, so I qualify it. But my guess is, so she does what a proper girl ought not to do. Again, she leaves him. She goes back home. And this is 1800s. People didn't do that. So she's a strong woman. She gets back home, and her father and brothers and many men in the settlement were all killed in an Indian raid. So now she and her mother are living in the biggest house in the middle of hostile Indian territory alone. So the mother opens up the house as a boarding house to make a living. This is before Social Security, Medicare, unemployment compensation. Wait another year, right? So one of the boarders she lets stay for free is Andrew Jackson. Number one, she's playing matchmaker like a mother. Number two, if Jackson's in your house, you don't need a pit bull or home security. He's a monstrous person who shoots and kills many people in cold blood during his life. So they fall in love. The problem was she was married. So Jackson writes a letter to Louis Robards telling him, because women could not legally divorce at the time. So wait another year or two for that as well. Louis Robards gets a letter from Andy Jackson saying, I demand that you immediately give Rachel a divorce. If not, I will find you, and I will cut off both your ears with my sword and something else too. And Jackson did not make idle threats. Robards writes back saying, I'm giving the divorce. So they go to the Natchez and they get married. They come back and find out Robards never did the divorce. So Jackson is trying to hunt Robards down, so Robards quickly gives the divorce. She's married to 2 men at the same time. She's the whore of Tennessee. That's what she's called. So Jackson is running for president in 1824 against John Quincy Adams. Jackson wins the popular vote, but the electors gather and switch the results of the election because Jackson is a bully, a rapist, a narcissist, a liar, a monster. And they said, we have to save the nation. So they flip the results and give it to John Quincy Adams. Jackson's livid. Rachel says, thank God. She says, I prayed that God would deliver a miracle. I don't want to go to the White House because there's scandal, right? Now she'd be the whore of the U.S., not just the whore of Tennessee. 4 years later, Jackson wins and she prays that she doesn't have to go. On Christmas Eve, she dies of a heart attack. She's buried in a gown she's going to wear to the inaugural. So Jackson goes to the inaugural alone. He doesn't have any kids. He had a niece, but the niece is mad at him because of his relationship with a prostitute, a whore. That's her. She's pretty, isn't she? Kind of Elizabeth Taylor look. She also looks remarkably contemporary. You know how people looked a certain way once upon a time? Yeah, she was a rare beauty. Her name is Peggy O'Neill Timberlake Eaton. What a name. So, anyways, Little Peg, they called her, the politician's pet. She was the most famous whore in Washington. It was said that she slept with half the Congress and the entire cabinet. Her father, John O'Neill, was an Irishman that owned a tavern/brothel. And Andrew Jackson and this guy, John Eaton, that was Jackson's best friend and a fellow senator from Tennessee. Jackson names Eaton as Secretary of War. Today we'd say Secretary of Defense, although they're trying to return it to war again. So Eaton and Jackson used to visit her, and I'm putting visit in finger quotes, got it? So she's the most famous whore. Jackson's the newly elected president. The inaugural's coming up. There's no first lady. Jackson picks Peg to be the presiding first lady. They were saying when Jackson was running for office, if you elect Jackson, we're gonna have a whore as first lady. Guess what? We did. We had a whore. So Peggy, the most famous whore, we call this petticoat government. All the wives of Congress and the cabinet would not let their husbands go to the inaugural because Peg was there and they were all sleeping with her. So it's like gridlock. Daniel Webster, the intellectual of Congress, if you heard that name today, an intellectual congressman is an oxymoron, isn't it? But Daniel Webster got up at the inaugural and said a toast to John Eaton's mistress and the mistress of all the rest of us too. When the women of Washington would not let their husbands attend a cabinet meeting, Webster got up and gives a toast at one and says, "May the next president be a bachelor." You know, so anyways, Little Peg was a whore and was the White House. She had ran away and married a guy named Timberlake in the Navy when she was young. So it was Peggy O'Neill Timberlake Eaton. And Timberlake's out at sea for 2 years when she has their first child. So we don't know who the father was. Maybe Eaton, maybe Jackson, we don't know. Then Timberlake comes back and then he leaves and goes back to sea for 2 years. She has their second child. He jumps overboard and commits suicide. So we never figured out paternity. So this is the kind of scandal that she was. So Peggy presides during Jackson's presidency. Eaton rather, Secretary Eaton, Senator Eaton is a lot older than her, passes long before her. She's now a saucy widow who returns to Washington and scandalizes the city. All of Washington is abuzz because a famous Italian ballet company is coming to perform. Washington, D.C. is not the magnificent city that it is today. We didn't have the Kennedy Center. So everybody's like, wow, an Italian ballet company is coming? And the star of it was a 21-year-old guy named Antonio Buccinani. Peg starts an affair with him. She's old enough to be his grandmother. Then she marries him. They go away on their honeymoon. She wakes up and he's gone. He goes back to Washington, cleans out all of her finances, everything, takes her granddaughter and sails for Italy. So Peg is sent to an old woman's home, before Social Security, Medicare. And there she is. When Peggy dies, because she was married to Eaton, she's buried in the Congressional Cemetery, which next to everybody.
Next to everybody that didn't want her and have anything to do with her.
That's right. So the obituary, as Tammy correctly noted, you get an A. The teacher's going to give you an apple.
Thank you. I did a lot of research.
She did. I love that. So the obituary in the Washington paper read, remember all the women hated Peg. It read, while they despised her in life, they are about to discover that she is now their neighbor forever. She's buried in the cemetery. So we did have a whore as first lady. So yeah.
Was he the most shocking to you? Was there a compelling president, or is he the most shocking?
Who?
Was Jackson?
Well, Jackson's one of my least favorite, that's for sure. He was the one behind the Trail of Tears, the 1830 Indian Removal Act, which took six nations, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, 6 nations of indigenous folks, and basically either slaughtered them or forced them to relocate, genocide everybody to Oklahoma. Jackson was an absolute monster, a bigot, a slave owner, a liar, a narcissist, just a wretched human.
How many of us, now we're gonna go like, how many of us, is this a surprise for a lot of you? The stories of Jackson, you guys all know this?
You went to Andrew Jackson High School? Yeah, I don't know for the life of me why anything is named for this guy. So when Obama was president, do you remember Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary? Anybody? Okay, well, there it is. They were, every couple years, they changed the currency a wee bit, right, for counterfeiting. You know how the picture of the presidents is now slightly off center? There's a watermark behind it, etc. So they were going to remove Hamilton from the 10 because he was never a president. But the musical became so famous. And Jack Lew's wife, that was a Hamilton nut. That was her favorite thing. So Jack Lew was not going to remove Hamilton. Anyways, led by Ron Chernow, a group of historians, present company included, wrote countless letters to the White House, Treasury Department, Congress. Don't take Hamilton off the 10. My son, by the way, who turns 25 soon, he's Alexander Hamilton. His name for Hamilton. My ex would not allow me to name him Harry Truman Watson, or Abraham Lincoln Watson, or Tecumseh Watson, and all these people from history that I like. So she said Alexander works. At any rate, so Hamilton. So happily they left Hamilton on the 10. Hamilton designed our currency, got us out of debt, created the financial system, created the first bank of the U.S. If anybody deserves to be on the currency, it's Hamilton. Instead, we were all saying, take Jackson off the 20. And they agreed to do it. The government went through, they had a commission, and Jackson was going to be taken off the 20. And then President Trump came in and said, I want Jackson on the 20. And to underscore it, he removed every, and I'm not being partisan, this isn't in line, this is not a partisan. He removed every portrait, but he put Andrew Jackson's portrait in the White House, where it hangs, oval. The only portrait in the oval right now is Jackson. So Jackson's back, and he's staying on the 20 for now. I can't but think that sooner or later, Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks and Eleanor Roosevelt and Abigail Adams, somebody, Chief Tecumseh, a picture of the Grand Tetons, B.B. King, some great form of Americana, right? The Mississippi River, something should be on the currency. It's Bruce Springsteen, you got my vote. Instead of, the boss, instead of Jackson. So, anyway, go ahead. Peg died about 60. So back then, that was a pretty decent life. Buccianani was 21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How did the wives and their roles influence the lives of these the presidents, and what role do they play in the narratives that you?
Good. So we've all heard the notion of someone being a mama's boy. One thing you find that I've written 2 books on the first ladies and several on the presidents. So it's one of my favorite things to do. Most presidents were mama's boys, and most first ladies were daddy's little girl. The relationship between the future first ladies and their dad was very strong. The relationship, think of FDR and his smothering mother. Think of George Washington and his smothering mother, Mary Ball. So we have that kind of thing going on. So the hand of mothers shaped these presidents, no question. So the hand of the first lady shaped these presidents, no question. Imagine being a president and the kind of decisions you have to make. You're not going to make an important decision without consulting the person closest to you. At the least, these first ladies were sounding boards, if not confidants, if not associate presidents. We know that even my boy, Harry Truman, I'm not a Best fan, but Harry wrote that I never made a decision without consulting the boss. That's what he said. Mary Todd Lincoln was fit to be tied most days, but to Lincoln's credit, he loved that she was smart, opinionated, political, and he valued that. Lincoln was very liberated. And Lincoln said, I never made a decision without running it by mother, as he always called her. So the first ladies played those roles. Warren Harding's wife was 5 years his senior. So there have been some age differentials. Martha Washington was a year older than George. Think of the Bushes, Babs and George I. Think of Adams. Many of these couples have been married 30 or 40 years before they went into the White House. So who do you trust? In the White House, you can't trust one of your aides because they're all going to write a kiss and tell book about your presidency. So the First Lady. So what I found is obviously the mothers played a role, and I've written about that, in shaping the presidents. Obviously the First Ladies, think of Eleanor Roosevelt for crying out loud, Abigail Adams. They were dynamos. Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama were Ivy League lawyers, right? These are dynamos in office. So they played a major role. But what I found in this book was many mistresses also played a role in shaping the presidents. Lucy Mercer was the love of FDR's life. It pains me to say it because I'm a giant Eleanor Roosevelt fan. Eleanor was the First Lady and everybody else is in second place. But FDR loved Lucy Mercer. He was absolutely the sun that rose and shined on her days. Her life started and ended with FDR. Now, I'm not saying that affair was okay. But I'm just saying it is what it is. And she shaped him. Think of FDR's presidency, the Great Depression, World War II. I mean, momentous. And the decisions he was making, right, with the bank holiday during the Depression, the CCC, the WPA, the TVA, all the alphabet soup. FDR turned to Lucy Mercer for comfort. In fact, FDR's children supported his affair with Lucy, which hurt Eleanor so much when she found that. Because the children knew FDR's health was not good, they knew he was stressed, and when Lucy was around, FDR was calm and happy. And the kids thought his happiness was important. So they actually helped run interference to keep Eleanor away, which really pains me to say. But this is part of the whole, this is part of the narrative that we find. So, yeah.
The next slide. James and Anne, tell us about them.
So that's James Buchanan.
Oh, yes.
From Pennsylvania, our 15th president, 1857 to 1861.
He's the one that, like the young one, right? The 20-year-old?
Oh, no, that's Cleveland.
Oh, Cleveland.
Cleveland married a 21-year-old. Right?
Yes,
I know.
him. I'm sorry.
Buchanan was even more scandalous, though. Cleveland and Buchanan were two of the most scandalous presidents at the time. Every newspaper, everybody in Congress, this was how the day started. Buchanan scandals, Cleveland scandals. So Buchanan, a Democrat from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, right before Lincoln. Buchanan's the only president never to marry. Now, he was engaged to this woman, Ann Coleman. And it was a tragedy. What happens is they're engaged to be married. Ann's friends catch Buchanan in some hanky-panky. They inform Ann. Ann calls off the wedding. She travels with her mother from Lancaster to Philadelphia to visit her favorite sister to recover from the emotion. The sister says, let's go to the theater. Ann says, I can't. The mother and sister go to the theater and come back and find Ann dead of an accidental overdose of laudanum, a tea and opium, right? I think RFK Jr. prescribed it for his instead of the American Medical Association. Ann's dead from an accidental dose of laudanum. They take her back to Lancaster. She's buried the day that was going to be her wedding, in her wedding gown. Buchanan, I'm sorry?
Another one buried in their wedding gown, right?
Two. Jackson's wife, Buchanan's girlfriend, buried in a wedding gown. The day that was supposed to be her wedding is a funeral. Buchanan goes to the grave and says, quote unquote, my love is in the grave. I shall never marry. Nay, I shall never love again. So he never courts, never dances, never kisses a woman, but nobody says much about it because this story's so compelling. However, the story's all baloney. That's Buchanan's version of the story. Would you like to hear the real version? Okay, here's the real version. They are engaged because her dad's the wealthiest man in Pennsylvania. He wanted the money. Buchanan wanted the money. Ann's friends catch Buchanan in some hanky-panky, but it wasn't with a woman. It's our only gay president. And that's why it's so shocking. Ann goes to Philadelphia. She doesn't accidentally, she purposely commits suicide. a needle in a haystack. I found the attending physician's report. I know, right? And he said it's the only patient he ever treated who took her own life from hysteria. Anne killed herself. Now, Buchanan is not at the grave. My love is in the grave. He made that all up. Why? Anne's father hired a vigilante group to hunt Buchanan down and kill him. For weeks, Buchanan was running for his life. That's when he concocts this story. And so throughout his career, he's in the House, he's in the Senate, he's a diplomat, he's the president. A lot of people don't question it. However, it comes out then that the members of Congress knew that Buchanan had a live-in lover named William Rufus King. He was a fellow U.S. senator. 2 senators were lovers. This is the best part of the story, and I apologize for smiling. He was the first senator from the great state of Alabama, and he was openly gay. So I like to remind my friends from Alabama. But they lived together. They were called Mr. and Mrs. Buchanan. James Buchanan was also called Nancy Buchanan. The word Nancy in the 1800s, and excuse my language, it would be, and please don't misconstrue, I'm a staunch advocate for same-sex equality, same-sex adoption, same-sex visitation rights. I always have been. My mother, my late mother and sister, my cousin were all Rockettes in New York City. My niece, my goddaughter are prima ballerinas in New York City today. I grew up with a family of female dancers in NYC. They all had male gay roommates. They were around dance. I grew up as a kid thinking, God bless them, whatever you want to do, live and let live. So please don't misconstrue. Anyway, the 2 of them were live and lover. The negative word Nancy, that was like saying fag. Okay, so he was Nancy Buchanan. Have you heard of Franklin Pierce and James K. Polk, both presidents? They would always write back to their wives about how Nancy and William Rufus King would wear matching his and his pocket handkerchiefs. They would wear matching his and his high silk stockings, and they'd come in hand, et cetera, et cetera. William Rufus King dies, we believe, of tuberculosis. He goes to Havana for treatment and dies there. There's a memorial to him. When I was in Havana, I saw it, because I'm nerdy about my history. Anyway, so Buchanan then never marries, never courts, never kisses, but late in life, he gets his buddies with this society woman named Mrs. Roosevelt from New York, no relation. They write letters back and forth. And in one letter, Buchanan writes, he says, I've quote unquote, I've gone out a wooing again for gentlemen. Wooing was like hooking up, but I've come up empty-handed again. He said, I guess I'll live by myself the rest of my life. He says, maybe I'll marry a woman as long as she knows that she can never expect any physical intimacy from me. So when Buchanan he also fell wildly in lust. When he was in Europe, he was visiting a monastery. He was in Europe touring. And at the monastery comes a monk. And he was Brother Antoine. It couldn't be Brother Tim, Brother Chuck. Of course it's Antoine. And Buchanan writes that when he walked in to greet him, he said, the sunlight through the stained glass window reflected on his chestnut almond beard. He said, as his eyes, the pools of blue liquid, mine melted. I said, be still my heart. Be still my heart. He says, and he came up and kissed me, his full lips on either side, as they do in the European custom, and I surrendered and collapsed into his arms. Buchanan was head over heels with Brother Antoine. So if you read Buchanan's letters, Doris Kearns Goodwin read the letters too. Don't believe me, believe her. She said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes it's not. So anyway, that was, so we had a gay president, we had a whore in the White House, all kinds of juicy scandals.
Okay. So his is a question from somebody. The book.
Tammy's not going to get fired for this, is she?
No, I hope
You're not going to banish me from Glen Eagles, are you? Is this okay? Okay.
All right, I have a question from somebody. I'm not going to stop. So how do the wives, they already had that one. The book focuses on the 19th century, a time with very different social norms. How did societal attitudes towards love, marriage, and scandal shape the way these presidential stories were perceived or hidden during their time?
Good. So on one hand, prostitution was more common then than today. A lot of men partook. It was kind of common, actually. It wasn't as shunned as it is today, which is kind of bizarre. On the other hand, the press didn't report on this stuff. Even as late as 1960s, the press knew Kennedy was having affairs with everyone, but they didn't write about it. So once upon a time, people just didn't write about it. Grover Cleveland, for example, who served, other than Trump, he's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, 1880s, 1890s. He was our 22nd and 24th president. He had an affair, possibly with a prostitute, we're not sure. Her name was Maria Halpin from Pennsylvania. She was at least loose, we're not sure beyond that. I wouldn't be surprised one way or the other, but we just don't know. And he's having an affair with her and threesomes with his best friend, Oscar Folsom. What happens is Maria Halpin gets pregnant, and neither Grover Cleveland or Oscar Folsom or Maria, nobody knows who the father is. So she has a boy, and she complicates it by naming it Oscar Cleveland. So this was a story that came out. It was a huge scandal. Yeah, this is it. Here's a cartoon. So Cleveland was a Democrat, and Cleveland's Republican opponents would follow him at all of his campaign stops, yelling, "Mama, where's my pa?" So they knew he had a child out of wedlock, maybe with the prostitute and the kinky sex. So it was a big scandal. However, right before the election, Cleveland's Republican opponent, James G. Blaine, made a big deal about this. He said, "You're going to have to lock up all women under 25 when Cleveland goes to Washington, because he's like a vampire at night. He's going to be raping everybody." I mean, just, Cleveland has hundreds of illegitimate kids. He really was using this. Then it turned out that, of course, Blaine had more mistresses than Cleveland. And Blaine's wife miraculously gave birth 7 months after they married. And Blaine isn't it always the people that talk about it the most? Yeah, when are we going to figure that out? So these reporters dig up all this dirt on Blaine. Now, today, they would have printed it right away. In fact, I hate to say they print it today, whether it's true or not. But what they did was they approached Cleveland with all this research that they did. And they hand it to him, and Cleveland throws it in the fireplace and says, "We don't go there. We don't do that. This is the presidency." The reporters were so blown away by that without outing Blaine's affairs, they talked about Cleveland's integrity, and the people elected him and reelected him. And you know what? He was an efficient reformist president. Now, would I take John Kennedy with a mistress over Millard B. Fillmore without one? You're damn right I would. Now, I'm not saying I'm okay with what they did. I don't do that. I'm always faithful. Would I take FDR with 3 mistresses over George W. Bush without one? You're damn right I would. At least FDR wasn't addicted to alcohol and coke as most of his life, right? Until he got married. So I'm not saying that this does or does not disqualify someone. What I try to do in the book is let the reader make the decision. And I really don't weigh in one way or another, even though I'm a Harry Truman guy. I'm kind of an ethical nerd. I want someone who's honorable, but I also want someone who can make the trains run on time and govern. So there were different attitudes at the time. Many folks. So the fact that Lincoln had visited prostitutes twice, at least once he consummated the deal, was not a big deal because men did that back then. Think of the West. Anything west of the Mississippi River, there was no one. A couple men, and every once in a while, a wagon load of whores was sent out west. So that's what everybody did. There would be 400 men to every one woman. So it was not that uncommon. And of course, the Kennedy was just nonstop. But the reporters didn't report on it.
Yes, I know at the end of the book that you did mention he was comparing like Clinton and some of the more current presidents to the presidents in the past, and he did keep it very diplomatic. And was very kind in the comments, and he wrote one his second. Do you have a second edition that you were talking about?
No, I'm going to. I'm under contract for so many books, and I've been churning out like 2 a year, 120,000 words each. So it's been enormous. As soon as I get through all my contractual obligations, I'll write the second
So
one.
do you think when you do this second edition, do you think it'll be as calming as this, or do you think with everything going on in society and all the information that you're going to have, how are you going to keep it
I know.
by,
Well, you stick to the facts, right? For example, I love Abraham Lincoln, but I wrote about what he did, right? And his marriage with Mary Todd was on again, off again, on again, off again. They were like the older couple that couldn't live with one another, but couldn't live without one another. And so it would have been a disservice to history if I cherry picked the evidence on Hamilton, right? I don't like Millard B. Fillmore at all, but he was loyal to his wife Abigail. So I didn't try to invent something. So on the second edition, I will be factual. I'll let it go. What I did offer was, in 1998, Bill Clinton was just starting the Lewinsky scandal, right? Which would be a huge issue. In 1998, a group of historians and scientists did DNA testing on Thomas Jefferson's DNA and Sally Hemings's DNA, the descendants, and they found the link. So what I remember writing an editorial for a big newspaper in 1998. I wasn't excusing what Bill Clinton did. It was dumb, it was wrong. But what I was saying was, when Clinton was being accused by Republicans, and it must be said that the four people bringing the charges were Bob Barr, Henry Hyde, Robert Livingston, and Newt Gingrich. All four had multiple mistresses getting abortions, cheating on their wives. I mean, all four made Bill Clinton look like Pope Francis, right? So there is an hypocrisy angle. But what I said, and I didn't excuse what Bill Clinton did, but when Bill Clinton was being attacked for this, I said, it's as if history called to the witness stand the greatest witness from history, Thomas Jefferson, another tall, charismatic Southern governor who turned into a president. And Jefferson would be called to the witness stand saying, wait a minute, you're going to impeach him over this? You should have seen what I did. You should have seen what Ben Franklin did. Oh my God, Hamilton, we can't even talk about it. You get the point? Ben Franklin, when he was the U.S. minister in Paris, had mistresses from 17 to 71, 17 to 71. The Parisian women loved Ben Franklin, in part because Franklin believed in women's equality. And where do you find, even today it's hard to find a man that does that, right? Where do you find a man that's that enlightened? And Ben Franklin was just brilliant. He was America's Leonardo. He was funny. He was one of his, here's his favorite thing to do. This was his go-to move. He loved hot tubs, which he found was the rage in Paris. They actually had heated it up with coals. So he would love to sit in a hot tub with like 3 naked duchesses, and they would all play chess. Now, the significance of that is this. At the time in the 1700s, women were not supposed to play chess for 2 reasons. 1, it was believed that women were not smart enough to play chess. 2, it would make women unappealing to men. What man would want a woman that's that smart? That's how sexist they were, right? So Ben Franklin, to his credit, what he would do is whenever he met an impressive woman, he would teach her to play chess. It was like their little secret. And when he met Hamilton's wife, Eliza, and Hamilton's wife's sister, Angelica, he taught them to play chess, which means they must have been remarkable women. The fact that Ben Franklin did that is good enough for me. So yeah, Ben Franklin's go-to, they would all sit around drinking naked in a hot tub, and he would teach them to play chess. So he was naughty, but in kind of a randy fashion, right? I'm not excusing what he did, but it was Ben Franklin, I guess. Don't forget, he invented the catheter, he invented the odometer, he had the Franklin stove, bifocals, the lightning rod. And Ben Franklin invented hundreds of things. He never took a patent for a single one. He gave them away free as a gift to humanity. He was an abolitionist. He was arguing for women's equality. His wife, Deborah Reed, had been married to a man When Ben Franklin tried to court her when he was young, and of course Deborah Reed's parents said he'll never amount to anything, which I love. Then she married a man who was put in debtor's prison, and then the man fled the country. Deborah could never divorce and marry. Ben Franklin went back to her when she was stuck, and he invented the English common law tradition for a common law marriage. Once you're together for a certain number of years, so he saved her reputation. Now, he didn't stop having affairs, but I'm just trying to show you the complexity of all great men are usually complicated men. Same with women. But yeah.
I'm going to ask my last question and then we'll open it up to the audience. So your last slide, you said you had was it Kennedy, correct? Now, I wasn't aware that he had all the.
That's Jefferson's mistress in Italy. She was 26. Her name was Maria, and her husband was a bisexual British artist who loved to paint and then sleep with his male models. So he left her alone in France. Here comes Thomas Jefferson, recently widowed, 39, and they fall madly in love. He's her muse, she's his muse. They write poetry together, they play the viola together, they read great pieces of literature together. I mean, it's a real, she wants to marry Jefferson. But when Jefferson's wife, Martha Wales Skelton, was on her deathbed, she made Jefferson promise he would never remarry. So he says, I can't. She's so distraught. She flees France, goes back to her native Italy, and goes into a monastery as a nun the rest of her life. This is like a made-for-TV movie. But the two of them were just, when she's leaving, it's really funny. There was a popular book at the time, Tristan Shandy. It would be like 50 Shades of Grey. It was like the sexual, it was unbelievably risque for the time. Everybody read it. And there was a scene in the book where when a woman would travel by sea, you had to be careful of all the sailors who were desperate. So, and there weren't many bunks, so 2 or 3 people would share a bed. And what they would do is they would hang a sheet between the man and the woman. So that was in the book. So when Maria is sailing away, Jefferson writes her a letter. And he says to her, he says, I'm worried about, she has to sail to England and sail from England to Italy. He said, I'm worried about your honor with all those sailors. Be sure to hang a sheet between you and anybody else there. And she writes a letter back saying, if you had accompanied me, my honor would be more at risk because you would bring a knife and cut a circular hole in the sheet. That's Jefferson and Maria in the 1700s. And those letters survive. So I'm sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
So I wanted to circle back. We talking about the integrity of the president's personal life, being overshadowed by their public image. So when you told me about JFK and all the mistresses he had, I guess maybe I'm naive, but I don't believe, did it overshadow his public image?
Good question.
Or his political image?
Knowing that Kennedy had a lot of mistresses, how many people would still, let's say, vote for him? Would it disqualify him? Show of hands, anybody disqualify him? Okay, 2. Okay. All right, so most people, it didn't overshadow.
So do you feel that there's any presidents whose what's the question? President's personal life overshadowed?
Yeah, I would. So I said at the outset here, I try to not judge these presidents because my work is to dig up all the stories and put them in a book and let you make the decision. Got it? And I just said a moment ago, I would take FDR with 3 mistresses over George W. Bush or Millard B. Fillmore or Jimmy Carter without a mistress. Got it? I think if Nixon had a mistress, he might have been a little better president. Henry Kissinger, who knew Nixon better than anyone, said, I never saw Nixon talk to Pat. Yeah, so poor Pat Nixon was a remarkable woman, by the way. Put herself, she was from Elon, Nevada, a mining town. Parents died young. She had 2 little brothers. She works and raises her brothers. She gets into USC, puts herself through school. In between semesters, she learns to drive a car, and she drives kids back and forth across the country. She was a remarkable woman. She did community theater, but she married Nixon, who would not let her speak, not let her see friends, not let her have a job, not let her. Nixon was awful. Anyway, so yes. So starting in 1948, the great historian, to directly answer your question, the great historian Arthur Schlesinger Sr. from Harvard he picked 37 or 38 of the country's leading historians and had them rank all the presidents.
That's right. You did have a lecture on that.
I gave that
Yes.
lecture here. Ever since then, we do these ranking polls. After Schlesinger died, his son, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, took it over. Today, it's C-SPAN and the White House Historical Association. And about every 3 years, we do a new ranking poll. I've had the great honor of being one of the rankers. They still pick about 38 guys, and Doris Kearns Goodwin, to rank. I've done maybe 9 of the last 10. Anyway, so I love it. And me and everybody else, we still rank Kennedy as above average as a president, as like a B+.
So when you rank them, do you take into consideration all that?
One of the criteria
Ranking
is
going on?
moral leadership.
Moral leadership.
Moral leadership.
And how does that
ethics.
weigh?
So Kennedy had a lot of affairs, no question, more than any other president. However, Kennedy created the Peace Corps. Kennedy expanded programs for the poor. Kennedy created that program to bring students from around the world for free to study in the United States. Kennedy, I think from a moral public perspective, was a very moral leader. From a private life perspective, he was not. I think his moral public life supersedes his moral blemish in his private life. Jackie knew he was doing this, not to excuse it. Jackie Kennedy would always go out for lunch, and before she returned to the White House, she would always call ahead with an ETA. She just didn't want to see it. And Kennedy had 2 young secretaries, I'm going to put secretaries in finger quotes because neither one typed. Their Secret Service code names were Fiddle and Faddle. This is in the Kennedy Library. It's not a theory, it's written out. And about twice a week, they would come over and have a threesome for lunch with Kennedy. But Jackie would go out for lunch, but Kennedy knew when she was coming back, so Fiddle and Faddle. Every president in modern times except Trump records all the visitor lists to the White House, the phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. Trump hasn't done it. It's a grotesque violation of decency. It's the public's house. It's not his house. It's not Kennedy's house. It's our house, the White House. So you can check the record, and Fiddle and Faddle would check in like at 11:20 and check out around 1:10, and Jackie was always coming back around 1:30 or whatever. So she knew. Now, do I wish the presidents were like Harry Truman and John Adams?
Of course you do.
Of course I do. And there are some, Harry Truman, John Adams, George Washington, who were faithful. And I think they were great moral men, and I'm fans of all of them. Yet George Washington owned slaves. How do we reconcile that? Without George, we'd all be drinking tea today. We wouldn't have won the revolution. Yet, so talk about a great man. And Washington's 8 years as president were without a single blemish in terms of a scandal or ethical violation. Washington was so conscious of that. In fact, Washington favored impeaching presidents on a regular basis to keep them honest. And he said, you know what the grounds for impeachment should be? Washington wrote, quote unquote, conduct unbecoming of a gentleman. So Washington had no blemish, yet he owned slaves in the White House.
How do you never lived in the White House?
Not the way, it was Philadelphia, was it? New York City, 1 year, Philadelphia, 7 years. Washington, D.C. opened up November 1, 1800. So the pre-White House. His presidential home in Philadelphia, he had slaves working for him in the home. In fact, Philadelphia was the most progressive city at the time. It had outlawed slavery. Philadelphia had a rule that if someone enslaved was in the city for like 45 days, they were automatically freed. So Washington would have his slaves every 44 days shuttled back and forth, yet not a single blemish. Jimmy Carter had no ethical scandals, but was not a good president. He was a little below average, I believe. But so Kennedy, I rank him somewhere around 10. I think he's a B+, he's an above average president, it supersedes. So these affairs, do they weigh in one way or the other? You know, I wish they weren't, but take LBJ. LBJ had a lot of affairs, and they were rather vulgar and disgusting the way he acted. But LBJ signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, signed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, signed Medicare and Medicaid, childhood vaccinations, school lunch, prenatal care. If you want to talk moral leadership, I'll take all that with a few affairs over someone who wants to dismantle all that with lots of affairs. You know, so I will say all this, the one example that would factor in for me would be President Trump.
We're not going to Trump.
No, but you know, apropos to the topic, I don't justify an affair, but we're talking chronically raping people.
Right.
Dozens of people have alleged rape and molestation. Kennedy's affairs were consensual. I don't agree with them. I don't condone them. I don't do it in my own life. But I think the Peace Corps and the space program outweigh consensual affairs. If a president rapes multiple women, that doesn't work for me.
All right, we're gonna. All right, that I let it go.
That's my opinion.
That was my gift. But let's go ahead. We're gonna get back now. Are there any audience questions without our talking about our?
Before you ask questions, I'll show you a picture of Kennedy's mistresses I put together with the Kennedy Library. You want to see Kennedy's mistresses? That's Miriam Fahnestock. There was always a rumor that when Kennedy was president, there was an intern that worked for Jackie, and she was found naked in the back seat of the presidential limo, and the Secret Service put a coat over her, and nobody knew for sure. Well, then a couple years ago, this lady, now her grandmother, gets up and says, I was the meanie. She was the one, she came forward with the story, everything matched. So Kennedy was sleeping with a college student intern that worked for Jackie in the back seat of the limo. This is Florence Pritchett, a Palm Beach socialite that he dated. And anyways, there's a lot more. I'm going to skip it. Pamela Turner was Jackie's secretary, and he had an affair with his wife's secretary. Horrible. Kim Novak, anybody know her? So Kennedy slept with all the A-list Hollywood bombshells. Kim Novak, Janet Leigh, Psycho, Jane Mansfield, both of her. Angie Dickinson, police woman. The night of his inaugural, January 20th, 1961, Kennedy had a ball. He went upstairs to the private quarters after Jackie went back to the White House with Angie Dickinson, then a young model. Olivia de Havilland, one of the greats. Peggy Cummins, another Hollywood actor. She wasn't an A-lister. She was the one that always got eaten by the monster in the beef movies or whatever. Angela Green. Yeah.
He had good taste, I guess, ladies.
This is the one my dad liked. She attorney. Blaze Starr, the stripper from New Orleans. Remember her? She was from Baltimore, and then, yeah. The one that really got Kennedy, and Mary Pinchot Meyer was one of Kennedy's mistresses. She was just a regular citizen, and she's taking a walk, and she gets mugged and killed by a robber in Washington, D.C. in a park. So her uncle was Ben Bradley, the great Washington Post newspaperman. He goes back to her apartment, has to clean it out. He finds her stack of diary letters about Kennedy, where she described every single detail. So it's there. Drury Malcolm was another Palm Beach socialite. This is the code name for these two was Inga Binga. They were both believed to be East German spies. And we know that Kennedy would be going to a meeting in his limo with the Secret Service. He would tell them, turn off this seedy road in the city, and I'm going to, Motel 6. And they begged him not to do it because of the security risk. They didn't sweep it, they didn't, and he would go in for like a half an hour, those two would be in there, and then he'd come out and then he'd go to his meeting. So he was so reckless. They could have killed him or poisoned him. Judith Exner, this is not Joe Pesci. This is Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss. That's his favorite mistress, Judith Exner. Kennedy was sleeping with the mistress of the Chicago mob boss. Talk about wanting to get whacked, right? This is like an episode of The Sopranos. What she does, though, before she dies, she does an interview with a reporter where she described everything. She said Kennedy's back was so bad when he broke his back in World War II. PT-109, a destroyer ran over his boat. He broke his back. One of his men was unconscious and had been burned. Kennedy puts with a broken back, puts a life jacket on the guy, holds it in a string in his teeth, and backstrokes, pulls the guy over a course of 2 days, the distance of miles to an island, saves the guy's life. Incredible heroism, but his back was really bad. She said he always had to just lay on his back whenever they did it because his back was so bad. So she gave it, the rest of the details I can't say because this is Glen Eagles. And I think the world of Tammy. So anyway, so it just goes on and on and on and on. That's the book. Anyway. So this is about half of his mistresses. Marilyn Monroe was one of his mistresses, yes. But I figured everybody knew that one, so I was trying to do the ones that we didn't know. Marilyn Monroe would call the White House because they log in all presidencies in modern times except the current one. They would log in the calls. I'm just being factual. It's true. What happened was, so they would log in the calls at the Kennedy White House. If I call the White House, they're going to log in. Robert Watson called at 3 o'clock or whatever. Marilyn Monroe would call at like 9:12, 9:14, 9:23, 9:24. In other words, he wasn't answering, and she would just obsessively keep calling over and over and over. I don't know what that means, but it's in the record.
Anybody? I just wanted to, real quick, because we're over our time, and I gave you guys over an hour to ask questions, and nobody raised their hand. So.
Yes, Ronald Reagan, can you stand on?
Yeah, Ronald Reagan, other than Trump, the only president to be divorced.
I'll give you 3 minutes.
Reagan was married to Jane Wyman, and both Reagan and her were having affairs on one another. And then Reagan met Nancy Davis, the B actor, and he was having affairs on her. She was having affairs on him. But then once they were married, I believe they did not. I believe they had a faithful, good marriage once they were married, yeah.
Everybody, did you like this format today? So we have plenty of food. Dr. Watson is going to hang with us, I believe. I think I have those people that borrowed my book. I think we have 2 are still out, right? Who has one? Okay, all right, because he's going to sign 2, I think, for Mr. Rosen and Mr. Schoenwald, correct?
They're available on Amazon, paperback for like $9 or something.
No, for like 30. Are you?
What?
Yes. That's why I had to go. Oh,
On
yeah.
Amazon?
Yes, right? They're expensive.
They must have taken it out of print then.
So,
They used to be $9.99.
so anyway, so thank you. Let's help give Dr. Watson an applause. Thank you so much.
say it's like this.
Lady Carol, you know why George Washington's speeches were so social.
How come you didn't talk about that? Hi, lady.
If he was so charismatic and he was so desirable and everything, what about his teeth? George Washington.
Mine is all the set. No, we're done. I just wish we could figure out this.